We have questioning theist, pronouns are he, him in Washington, who says, I don't think atheists use critical thinking. And if I can't agree with you on little things, how can I agree with you on big things? Wow, that's fun. Welcome, questioning.
Hey. Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good. Good Sunday, so overall good.
Cool. What do you got?
Okay, sure. So where I agree with you guys is on not agree exactly, but where I think you guys are logically sound is on if there may be a God or not. I've heard your gumball analogy, burden of proof for evidence, all these arguments. I think you may be right on this, but the thing is, for example, how do I know if I'm judging a group for respect with credibility, don't I need to agree with their other things?
No. It's possible for me to be right on 9 things and wrong on the 10th thing. Each individual position requires its own argument supported by evidence.
That is fair, but I'd say let's say you're in a practical situation, wouldn't you? Let's say someone made 9 incorrect statements, but 1 correct statement, right? How even you would use the 9 incorrect statements he made to judge his credibility, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, but if a lawyer gets you all, let's say you're on trial and the lawyer lost the last couple cases or something, it has nothing to do with the fact that they have good evidence for their client in this case. They're just not related. I don't really see the point.
I mean, if you were to assess, I think I get what you're saying. Here's somebody who made 10 statements and 9 of them were wrong. Would we consider them a particularly good thinker? No. But the fact that you know that 9 of them were wrong and 1 of them is true suggests that you're a good thinker. And so you'll be able to analyze which of those is correct. But similarly, if somebody had 9 statements right, you don't know whether or not the 10th one is right because they're each independent. This is why, there's a line about using eyewitnesses. Suddenly, the character of the person is somehow relevant to their testimony. It's not. You're not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not wrong about 9 out of 10 things. Mm-hmm. So if you would find the things, for example, if you point out something that we disagree about, then we may be able, we seem to disagree about a God, even though you think that we're probably right. What do we disagree about that makes you question our ability to think critically?
No, definitely. Not you, but it's a little personal to you guys. So it's not like an attack. I promise you. I'm not trying to do this on purpose. But is it okay if I bring it up? I do not feel any offense to this.
Hang on. I'm going to type something down on my screen here.
Sure, no worries.
Go ahead.
It's not. This is. Yeah, okay. So, for example, when the Atheist Experience, I believe, kind of broke up and stuff, right? On the transgender sport issue, right? I'm pro-transgender, whatever, and I'm pro-LGBT. I don't have any problems with this. But the thing is, on the sports thing, it's almost I don't think I feel like the members who left because of that were not using critical thinking on that idea, but they could use critical thinking on God. For example, it's not it's kind of common sense that someone's going to be tolerable. No?
Hey, excuse me. Sure. So,
yes,
the people who left, you probably don't even know the reasons that they left or what their issues were. Mm-hmm. But if your disagreement is about what role trans people should play in sports, I would highly recommend that you go. I can actually recommend videos for you offline, but we're not going to sit here and rehash that issue.
Okay. Okay, so are you saying bring another example or?
I guess I'm just, this is the Atheist Experience. I thought we were going to talk about God stuff.
Sure, but I mean, my thing is on credibility, right? So if I cannot agree with you on
no, we've already addressed that. You could think I'm wrong about 20. You could think I'm wrong about 20 things, and it doesn't matter as to whether or not I'm credible on the God thing. And the fact that you don't agree with me, the fact that you don't agree with me doesn't mean that I'm wrong on those other things.
Yeah, and it's really strange because it's a notion at which you take to be credible. I mean, look at flat earthers; they don't find educational authorities to be very credible, yet they're just wrong, right? The independent evidence, they're just wrong. So you would look at the actual evidence in question, not the person who presents the evidence. Right, because that has nothing to do with what the actual analysis of the evidence is, right?
No, that is fair, and I agree with you. You have to look at the specific argument, and like I said in the beginning, right? I think your argument is fundamentally sound when you're saying the gumball machine and everything, at least based on an evidence point of view, right? But yeah, it's the credibility thing. It's like how, okay, let's say I was
know what that means.
Talking to a...
I think he's saying that the analogies works, but I'm confused too, because like we get the gumball analogy, right? The fact that like I might not think it's the you're good.
We don't make arguments against the existence of God. People try to demonstrate the truth that a God exists, and they repeatedly fail, and we're pointing that out. But to the extent that I argue against the existence of God, it may be the case that if my argument is fundamentally identical, or my objection to a theistic argument is fundamentally identical to another atheist who disagrees with me on trans women in sports,
sure,
isn't that enough to say that my position on trans women in sports is irrelevant to the God question?
I agree with you, but okay, can I?
Cool. No. You don't get to. I agree with you, but you either agree or you don't.
Okay, I agree. Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Okay, do you agree? Do you think all disciplines, let's say you got disciplines, gender studies, theology, and evolutionary biology, do you think all of these are created equal?
No.
No, it's because let's say you got an evolutionary biologist, their track record is far more credible than a gender studies, if that's more credible than even maybe theology or something, right?
No.
So I think most people would.
No.
Okay.
Stop. An expert on. So there are hard sciences and there are soft sciences. That has nothing to do with individual credibility. Please stop with individual credibility. It's irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the argument. It doesn't matter if an AI came up with it, Jmike came up with it, I came up with it, Dawkins came up with it, your mom came up with it, or the guy at the end of the street came up with it. Credibility is irrelevant to an argument.
In fact,
the argument is either
you listen to the show,
valid in structure.
In fact, if you listen to the show, you'll hear like plenty of the hosts preach all the time. Like even especially if a theist calls and they go, you know what, you might be right on that. One of the first responses, at least the response that I will give, is don't just take my word for it, right? Don't just be like, okay, you know, you sounded smart or you said something that makes sense, so therefore it's true. Don't take my credibility on how I heard it. Go look at the information, the evidence yourself, right? So it's not, this is like a point that we make towards other people once they go, you know what, I agree with your point. It's like, okay, do more, right? Make sure that what I'm telling you is not just me like wooing you over, right? Go look at the evidence. So it's consistent across the board that the credibility of some person is irrelevant, because it's the content of what they're saying is what we're analyzing, right? We're not analyzing the character. We're analyzing the content of what's being discussed.
No, I agree, but I would say, for example,
no, you can't. There you go again.
Physics, right?
No, I give up. There you go again. I agree, but if a flat earther says that the sky is blue, they're not fucking wrong. Their credibility is irrelevant.
Yes. Correct.
And by the way, when I predicted what you were going to do, when I predicted what you were going to object to, I wrote down trans issues on my notepad here. You believe me?
Sure, I believe you. But
yes, because it's the single most predictable thing that dude bros call in to bitch about is how can you be reasonable about all these other things, but not about trans issues? Why do you believe in something, blah, blah, blah. I'm happy to talk about trans rights issues in other contexts, but if you're a theist and you're calling in to question your theism, let's focus on that and not on anybody's character, because nobody's character is relevant to this.
Definitely. I'm not going to pick on anyone's character. My question was, I've heard you sometimes say, let's say you'll argue with a theist, right? And you'll say something, you'll argue on physics, and you'll be like, I do not understand the physics, but this is what the physicists say, right? How do you know the physicists are right? It's because they're credible, right? Wouldn't you say so? Because they have authority on that field. For example, Stephen Hawking.
No. So, wow, this is mind-numbing. It's not because they're credible, and I certainly don't go ask physicists what their position is on sports, because their credibility in an area like sports is irrelevant. You said you weren't going to talk about credibility and character, and you went right back and did it again. Physicists are not believed. Physicists are not believed because of their character or their qualifications or their credentials or how many times you can find they're right on other subjects. It is the evidence supporting the argument that is all that is relevant to the conclusions, period. You are seeking a popularity argument in order to believe something or not. And that is fallacious.
Yeah, because there's a difference between pointing to like a consensus of physicists when we're pointing to that, what's being discussed among, what's being analyzed or peer reviewed amongst that is the actual evidence, right? The predictions that they generate. And so this is not like an issue of like the amount of people as opposed to the actual peer review process that's involved with these experts that are constantly reviewing the information, right? That's a distinction from just people think it's true.
Right. You are implicitly engaged in the fallacious argument from authority, only you're doing it with regard to their credibility in other areas. Is it more likely that someone who's spent 20 years studying biology is going to be correct more often than someone who's never studied biology? Yes. But that doesn't mean that any given statement from either of them is true or not true. And it doesn't mean that their overall credibility in any way impacts whether an individual statement is true or not true. Does that make sense?
No, that makes definite sense. Okay. I'll probably call them back next week, and I'll think about this. And I think it was a good discussion. I think it was good.